Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. My apologies for a couple of days delay here. It's been a little hectic at work, lots of hours putting in, so it's been a long set of evenings and I haven't had much chance to work on videos. So for this one, I thought I'd make it a little special and I would go back in time and look at some of the past suggestions. Someone had mentioned on the comments that if I ever do that, and yes, I do. Every now and then I do go back to try to see stuff that might have fallen through the cracks. And in this case, this one was a suggestion that was 2 years ago. So can you believe that 2 years since then? So I went back pretty long ways for this. Now I debated on this one whether to add it on the ghosts and spirits, but in looking at more in the information, it turns out that the name that it has nothing to do with it being supernatural. It's just the fact that that's the name associated with this cryptid. And if anything, this may even be the loosest sense of cryptid because in actuality it's a real animal of sorts, but something that may have morphed into something else. So you'll hear about all that here in a few minutes. So it has to do with the legend here of the Red Ghost Camel. So it's, again, says ghost, but it has nothing to do with supernatural or paranormal stuff. It's just the name that's been tied to it. And this is a cryptid of some sort that goes back quite a ways to the 1800s, in fact. And so let's talk about all that information here. So what is the Red Ghost Camel? Well, it has to go again to the 1800s. This was a time when America was still expanding, especially westward, and a little bit before, in this case, the Civil War. During that time period, the idea was that if people are moving westward, they will need something in terms of being able to, I guess, have mail sent out, be able to send supplies. This is something where you have a situation, there's nothing in terms of actual trains, I guess, like actual railroads crisscrossing roads nonetheless. So the only way to truly have something feasible is to use a more traditional route, and thinking that camels are obviously so popular in the Middle East, and the way they can travel between long distances without having to let's say take breaks or look for water, or basically built for long wandering let's say trips through the desert. In this case, this being the West and many areas also having a desert-like atmosphere, it was thought that they could bring, this being the government, a large supply of camels over and then utilize them for various supply runs. Again, mail, supplies, food, all along those lines. So it took no less than in 1854 a bill to pass. $30,000 was used, which that was a huge amount of money at that time, to bring over 72 camels, to import them into the U.S. And then in 1857 they began to be utilized towards purposes intended. So during that time, it was found out though that the camels weren't really adequate towards, I guess, being domesticated. Obviously, they are wild animals. They've always been considered wild. Maybe in certain places in the Middle East, they have some domesticated traits, but at least bringing them over straight here to the U.S., it was found that it was pretty hard to take care of them. This is because they had a habit of apparently frightening horses. Can you believe that? Like, horses would not like to be around the camels, and so having the two of them together proved to be pretty difficult. And then on top of that, camels always tended to wander at night. So you could tie them up, or you could put them in some kind of, I guess, makeshift camp of some sort. But no, they would try to find a way to go out, and then it became a time period trying to find them and then bring them back. So during that time, it became pretty unpopular for those having to take care of them, especially soldiers in the U.S., whose task it was, again, to make sure that supplies were being sent off throughout the West. So once the Civil War broke out a couple of years later, all these camels were eventually either A, sold at some kind of auction, who knew who bought them, maybe circuses bought them, or maybe private owners bought them, who knew. But the rest of them that went unsold or actually turned loose into the desert. So one would think that that's where the story ended, but no. The legend of the Red Ghost came about after that, because as it turns out, Cut to about 1883, and a very strange incident began. This is what happened. So this is about now a little over, let's say, maybe 20 years or so since the introduction of the camels. By now they have been let loose throughout the deserts. Who knows who survived as far as those camels? Who knows who I guess died? But in some cases, in 1883, evidence was found that there was some kind of creature of some sort that did something pretty bad, because a woman was found trampled to death, and on top of that there was in a nearby bush large clumps of some kind of reddish fur, and then on top of that there was large hoof prints around that area too, unlike any other type of hoof prints that the locals there knew of. So trying to figure out, what had happened, they did realize that obviously there was some kind of large animal, but that reddish fur was not something that they were familiar with, let alone those hoof prints. So cut to a little bit time later, maybe a short time later, at the time whenever two miners were sleeping. I don't know if they were like gold miners or other type of miners, but they stated that when they were there sleeping, suddenly something woke them up, something very, very large, a large animal sort, tore down into their tent, brought them up obviously from their sleeping status, but even then they were unable to identify the beast. Whatever this thing was, it was just letting loose, just completely just demolishing everything. And whenever the incident finished and the animal left and ran off, they too found large hoof prints around the area, and then guess what? They also found large sections of red hair or red fur as well. So other incidents occurred as well, very similar items. People would see a large animal, people would have some kind of bizarre experience with one of these large animals, same red hair, same hoofs, and then finally people were adding 2 plus 2, and they were able to realize that this was a camel. So when that happened, one rancher said, and this was the introduction of yet another portion of this red ghost camel, said that they saw something in the distance, and it was a camel, and the strangest thing, this camel seemed to have a rider of some sort, like something was actually on top of the rider, but the way it was galloping loosely on top of the camel, it appeared to that rancher, that whoever that was, it was dead, like the person on top of it was dead. So people now knew that, and to be on the lookout. Whatever this thing was, it was a camel, and it seemed to have some kind of deceased person on top of it. So the hunt was on. People tried to see what could be done to try to track this thing, to try to bring it down. There was one interesting incident with this red ghost camel, that they found it, and while I guess it was being chased, something fell off from the person on top of the camel, and as it turns out, it was a human skull. So it confirmed that yes, whatever was on top of this camel, it was a dead person, by now deteriorated to nothing but bones and so forth. So people found that skull, and even to this day they have no idea who the identity of that person was, because later on they also discovered the bones of that same person at another incident. So maybe this camel, I'm trying to think that maybe this camel was actually trying to run off and then creating a ruckus everywhere, because it was trying to get this thing off of its back, whatever, like in this case the deceased rider, to it was simply just another thing. It was trying to get it off, but it couldn't until it finally successfully did so several years later. So whoever that person was, again, it remains a mystery, but eventually this red ghost camel had its end. It had its demise, and because in 1893, now 10 years later since the very first incident, that's when a farmer found the now famous red camel in his garden, and then he shot and killed it right then and there. So that was it. That was the end of it. And they were able to make sure that yes, this was the red ghost camel, the infamous one, and it was now completely deceased. But if you think that that's it, that's the last story associated with these camels, because for all intents and purposes, when those 72 camels and whatever the ones that were left that were not sold at auction were left off in the desert, the only known instances really was this one ghost camel, this red ghost camel. But cut to about 1907, and people suddenly started seeing 2 wild camels there in Nevada, and then more sightings were being reported sporadically throughout the area. In fact, You can go up to 1934 because there was other people that were saying that they saw camels trekking across Arizona and then also into California. And then in another case, someone reported that they saw a camel all the way to Los Angeles as well. So quite fascinating stuff. So if you thought that these camels were essentially done for after that last Red Ghost Camel was killed, nope. It seems like to this day, maybe you still have the option of these camels creating some kind of habitat, some kind of family or whatever out there in the long deserts, the southwest deserts, especially towards the Nevada, Arizona, maybe California area, and they could still be there to this day. So quite so fascinating stuff. So, but that's it. That's the information associated with the cryptid, quote unquote, with the Red Ghost Camel. Again, very loose association, only if but for the fact that you have something that seemed to survive its essential wanderings into the desert, just pretty much left to die as is, and yet there it is persisting and lasting for a good number of decades until it was finally shot. And then of course, if those are its clan and some of its other, I guess, camels from its family, surviving well into other decades as well to this day too, maybe even to the present day. So if anyone has any more information about this pretty fantastic tale, please post it here below. I haven't heard, obviously, of any news associated with camels in our area, let's say in Texas or in any other parts of the Southwest roaming around. But if anyone still has any more information about that, that would be great to hear. How neat is it, right? This history, the idea that at one point the U.S. government tried to utilize camels to make sure that as a makeshift way send supplies and so forth out towards the West. So much fascinating stuff when it comes to the history of the U.S. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care.